When a quiet retiree's front garden was called an eyesore by her petty HOA, she didn't fight back with words. She fought back with flowers, soil, and nationwide glory. Let me start from beginning. It began on a humid morning in early May, when the dew still clung to the petals of the marigolds lining the front walk. The neighborhood was still, the kind of stillness that only comes before trouble. A yellow paper was taped to the front door, crisp, official, and coldly worded. It was from the Ridgewood Meadows Homeowners Association, and it bore a headline that made the old woman's heart sink. Notice of violation. Non-compliant landscaping. For 30 years she had tended her little patch of earth. When her husband passed, the garden became her company. She grew roses for memory, lavender for calm, and tomatoes because they reminded her of summers long ago. Her garden was more than a hobby. It was her heartbeat. But to the HOA, it was non-standard vegetation inconsistent with the aesthetic uniformity of Ridgewood Meadows. In other words, too colorful, too wild, too alive. The notice came with an ultimatum. Remove all unapproved plantings within 2 weeks, or face escalating fines. No one from the HOA had come to speak to her personally. They hadn't asked, hadn't listened. They simply left a paper and a threat. That evening, as the sun sank behind the rows of identical beige houses, she looked out across her yard. The marigolds glowed gold, the ivy curled over the mailbox, and the air carried the faint scent of mint. It was imperfect, yes, but it was beautiful, and something inside her hardened. In the following days, the gossip began. Neighbors whispered over fences, speculating that the HOA president, Trina Mallory, had spearheaded the complaint. Trina was known for her obsession with uniform lawns, trimmed, sterile, and without character. Some said she'd filed the report after losing the Yard of the Month sign 3 times in a row to other homes. Others claimed she wanted to set an example, to remind everyone who truly ran Ridgewood Meadows. The retired woman quietly collected every letter, every warning, and began documenting everything. Photos of her flowers, dates and times of notices, even screenshots of the HOA's bylaws. There was a clause buried deep in the paperwork that allowed for creative landscaping with board approval, and she intended to use it. But something unexpected happened the day she went to the HOA office to request that approval. They laughed. Not loudly, but just enough for her to hear. They told her, politely but patronizingly, that her garden didn't fit the community image. That the correct aesthetic was green grass and mulch beds, nothing more. They sent her home with another printed list of approved plants, none of which she wanted. That night she didn't sleep. Instead, she sat at her kitchen table under the dim light, staring at an open laptop. A website glowed on the screen. The National Home and Garden Showcase. America's Best Yard 2025. Entries open to anyone with a passion for gardening. The prize, national recognition, a trophy, and $10,000. Her hands trembled as she clicked Apply. In the days that followed, the HOA escalated their campaign. Warning letters became fines. Neighbors were pressured to complain. The woman's garden, once admired, became a silent battleground. Yet every morning she went outside with her watering can and worked harder. She replanted, reshaped, and recorded everything. What began as a personal refuge was turning into something larger. A statement, a rebellion, a masterpiece. By the time the inspectors from the competition announced they would visit finalists in person, her garden had transformed. The patchy lawn was now a mosaic of color. Hydrangeas, peonies, and sculpted herbs framed by handmade stone borders. A tiny pond reflected the sky, and a wooden arch, crafted by her late husband decades ago, stood at the entrance like a guardian. When the HOA found out about the inspection, panic rippled through the board. If she won, it would make them look foolish. A special meeting was called. Violation notices were redoubled. Neighbors were warned about potential non-compliance penalties for supporting her. But the woman kept tending, kept growing, kept smiling. And the morning the competition judges pulled up to her driveway, cameras rolling, clipboards in hand. The HOA president herself was standing across the street, arms folded, seething. That day would change everything. The morning sun painted the sky in soft pinks and golds as the national competition judges stepped from their van. The HOA president stood nearby in her pressed linen suit, wearing a smile as tight as a rubber band. The air buzzed with tension, but the garden, radiant and defiant, spoke louder than any words could. The judges wandered through the yard, awed by its beauty. They took notes on soil health, biodiversity, and sustainable irrigation. The retired woman stayed inside, watching from her kitchen window, her heart pounding. She had poured months of labor into every inch of that soil, even while fines piled up and letters kept arriving. Within minutes of the judge's departure, the HOA struck again. A new citation was waiting in her mailbox, citing unauthorized structural elements, the small archway and pond. They demanded removal within 7 days. The timing wasn't coincidence. It was retaliation. That night, she began recording everything on camera, not just photos, but full videos. She filmed herself opening the letters, the dates, the condition of her garden. She had a feeling she might need proof of what was coming. The next HOA meeting was packed. Trina Mallory stood at the podium, gavel in hand, declaring the garden a visual disruption to community order. The crowd murmured. But when a few brave neighbors spoke up, praising the garden, Trina shut them down. Then something unexpected happened. A young man from the crowd, a local news reporter who'd been tipped off, began filming. The footage would soon appear online with the headline, "Retired Woman Faces HOA Over Too Beautiful Garden." The clip spread quickly. Thousands watched. Thousands commented. Some laughed, others fumed. The HOA tried to issue a statement claiming environmental concerns, but no one bought it. The story went viral. Days later, a television crew arrived to film a segment for the Home and Garden Showcase. The garden's lush variety and resilience, despite opposition, fascinated the producers. The woman's humility and quiet strength charmed viewers. The story struck a nerve nationwide. An ordinary person standing up to bureaucratic pettiness with nothing but kindness and flowers. Meanwhile, the HOA spiraled. They held emergency meetings to discuss damage control. Trina was livid, complaining about defamation and misrepresentation. Yet the footage of her sneering at the garden spoke for itself. Online, support poured in. Strangers donated funds to cover the woman's HOA fines. Gardeners across the country sent seeds, tools, and notes of encouragement. Ridgewood Meadows, once a place of conformity, had become ground zero for a quiet revolution of individuality. When the finalists for America's Best Yard were announced, Her name appeared on the screen. Her small suburban home, once ridiculed, now represented her entire state. The HOA couldn't stop her now, not legally, not socially. She had become untouchable. But Trina wasn't done. She filed an emergency complaint to the city, claiming the garden violated local zoning ordinances. Inspectors were dispatched. The woman watched as they measured and photographed her front yard, only to find everything perfectly compliant. The report cleared her entirely. The city's final note: no violations found. Garden is exemplary in design and environmental sustainability. Word spread quickly. The same HOA that had tried to ban her flowers now faced national embarrassment. Trina began avoiding cameras, while the residents whispered about her downfall. Still, the woman stayed humble. She continued watering her plants, still tending her garden each morning as if nothing had changed. But deep down, she knew a reckoning was coming. A week before the national finals, she received an invitation to appear on live television for the award ceremony. Her garden, once labeled a violation, was now a finalist for the highest honor in American landscaping. And Ridgewood Meadows was about to learn what poetic justice looked like. The day of the awards dawned clear and warm. Across the country, viewers tuned in to the live broadcast of America's Best Yard 2025. The retired woman, wearing a simple floral dress and her late husband's gardening hat, stood backstage under studio lights. Her hands shook slightly, but her smile was calm. In Ridgewood Meadows, televisions flickered in nearly every home. Neighbors gathered in living rooms, curious to see how the story would end. Even Trina watched from her pristine, flowerless porch, her jaw tight, her eyes unblinking. The show's host introduced the finalists: sprawling estates, manicured lawns, and one small suburban garden from a place called Ridgewood Meadows. When the camera cut to her yard, the audience gasped. It looked like something out of a dream: layered textures of color, perfectly balanced natural symmetry, a living portrait of love and defiance. As the host began reading the results, time seemed to slow. Second place was announced, not her. Then the pause. Then the words that changed everything. And the winner of America's Best Yard 2025 is Margaret Lawson of Ridgewood Meadows. Applause roared through the studio. She blinked back tears as the host handed her the golden spade-shaped trophy. Cameras flashed. Reporters cheered. Somewhere in that sea of noise, the memory of her husband's laugh echoed faintly in her heart. Back home, her neighbors erupted in celebration. Balloons appeared on mailboxes. Children ran through sprinklers. The same people who had once stayed silent during her struggles now clapped and waved as her name flashed across the TV. But the true spectacle was yet to come. The next morning, a delivery truck arrived carrying an enormous banner. Congratulations to Ridgewood Meadows' own, Best Yard in America. It was ordered by the National Committee and installed directly at the entrance of the subdivision. The HOA tried to have it removed, claiming it wasn't approved signage, but the news cameras caught them in the act, and within hours they were bombarded with ridicule online. The footage went viral again, this time under the caption, HOA tries to take down award banner, fails miserably. Soon after, several board members resigned, citing public scrutiny. Trina herself stepped down a month later, blaming stress and harassment. In her place, a new board was elected, one that amended the bylaws to encourage creative landscaping, citing the Lawson clause. And as for Margaret, she didn't gloat. She spent her winnings improving her garden, adding a bench for neighbors to sit on, a bird bath, and a small sign by the path that read, "Beauty grows where freedom is planted." Visitors came from all over to see the yard that defied conformity. Children took pictures. Elderly couples walked through the paths, and the once silent neighborhood now buzzed with laughter and color. Every morning, Margaret still rose early, just as before. She watered the roses, trimmed the ivy, and whispered thanks to the soil that had carried her through. She had fought no one. She had simply grown louder than her critics. By the end of the summer, Ridgewood Meadows looked different. Lawns had color, porches had flower pots, and the sterile sameness had been replaced with life. Margaret often smiled quietly as she watched her neighbors plant their own gardens. She had not only won a contest, she had changed a community. And so, the woman they tried to silence with rules became the one who rewrote them, one petal at a time.